Chair. Today I think we're discussing perhaps one of the most complex areas of the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, the right to live independently and be included in the community. And to enable people to exercise that right requires really complex supports, crucially suitable housing, and interconnected physical and social facilities. And we know that the HSE's plan, Time to Move On from Congregated Settings, is moving much too slowly. Most pressingly is the over 1,300 people under 65 forced into nursing homes because the state still won't support them in community settings. So thanks for helping us understand how you operate and how your models of support can and should be applied in other settings to help as many people as possible to live independent lives and actively in their communities. First, for Crann Centre Ireland, firstly, can I just say that as a Cork TD, I'm familiar with the incredible work you do in ovens. Your use of the 2-gen approach that recognises whole family units and integrated processes responds to many of the issues that are raised on a weekly basis at this committee. In your opening statement, you indicated collaboration between a whole series of actors and that being important in the development of the 2-generation approach. I know it's been elaborated on, but from your experience in the US and here, could you talk a bit more about the significance of the cooperation? One of the issues that disabled people face here is what you've mentioned, a very siloed approach, with some responsibility belonging to the HSE, the Department of Housing, the Department of Transport, some local authorities, and so on, and consistently we see people falling through the cracks. And could you elaborate on the particular challenges that are faced by people with disabilities living in rural Ireland? What are the key recommendations needed to create systematic change in relation to that? And could you comment on your experience on what work can be done on simplifying and making government services more accessible? And then for Genio, I think we're all struck by your emphasis on having the people who will be using the services and supports being at the heart of the design. That shouldn't be striking. But implementation, evaluation of services, because I think it's clear that on average, services in Ireland are in no way close to that model. You mentioned research findings that the personalisation of accommodation had significant impacts on the degree of independence, social integration, and reduction of anxiety on people moving from congregated settings. Could you elaborate on that point? How does that approach kind of function on the ground? And your work through the Service Reform Fund in tandem with the HSE around helping people move from congregated settings is so positive and so welcome. From the lessons you've learned in that process, what is the potential for that approach to be rolled out on a much larger scale to support the hundreds of people still, unfortunately, in congregated settings? And you've rightly identified that this overall process can be challenging for everyone. And as public representatives, we come across cases where people in communal settings and their families have a preference to stay there rather than to be moved to community living. I'm just wondering if you could share your insights into maybe similar situations that you might have encountered. Thank you.
Thank you. Will we go to Tara and Nia first, and then we'll go to the Crown Project?
Thank you very much. Thank you for very pertinent questions as well in terms of, I think with the last question, in terms of how challenging this process is, we have been very involved with all 10 accelerated sites from Genio and hand in glove with the HSE and more particular with the people who are staffed with implementing decongregation. And what we say from that, the findings, is that it is very challenging. So with staff, you know, you're right in saying that these congregated settings are, you know, they're in violation of a lot of human rights and the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and that's factual. But in the staff's self-reports of what it's like to work in there, a lot of them use war terminology. So it's like going to war, and the closure of these places is very difficult. You're asking, I suppose, people to change long-standing instituted beliefs and practices that have been there over a very, very long period of time. As Tara pointed out earlier on, it's not today or yesterday that these congregated settings are there. They've been there for generations. So you're asking then people to change, and you're asking them to take on new roles. You're asking them to develop new relationships. towards new values and very much new behaviours in how they work and how they approach that work. You're asking people to unlearn a lot of behaviours, and with managing, when people are managing that type of change with staff, is that they cannot be that buffer no longer, that there has to be that questioning, there has to be that time for discomfort. You have to be able to feel the pinch of the backlash that is coming. And so all of that, as you can imagine then, is a very, I suppose, highly emotive, emotionally charged arena to be working within. So what we found from that is really that it's about, as Tara said, it's the capacity building, but it's really the person at the centre of that, and sometimes the person gets forgotten at the beginning of this change process, because everything's coming out with, you have HICWA orders, you have closure orders, you have media attention, and all rightfully so in that context. But when you begin to unpack it and unpack the layers, it is very, very ingrained beliefs and practices that have been there and have served a purpose for a long period of time. So bringing people around that, the staff really need an opportunity and ability to work their way into reform, and whether that's through fidelity to a model such as social role valorisation or the SSDL model that Tara spoke about, that they have a lifeboat, they have a way of being able to look at this and kind of go, I have a way to change my practice by doing, not by theory, not by nebulous concept, not by necessarily following a policy that maybe staff don't all know about. So that kind of policy implementation gap that they're living in. So that does give them the lifeboat, and the lifeboat is very much from that person-centred approach, so that will and preference of the person. But as Tara also kind of identified, it's the time to do that for staff, it's the resource available, it's the training that's required, but the person is at that centre. So all of a sudden you're spending a huge amount of time with an individual. As one staff member told us, she had worked with a lady for 30 years in the same setting, and only in the last 6 months, she said, did I realise who that lady is. I knew her as client or patient, but I never knew her as the individual that she is. So I think that's very telling, as well as maybe that other aspect of this is that staff are transformed. So staff do go on this journey, but the person is at the centre of it. The person is the catalyst. The person is the one pushing the agenda, pushing their will and preference, pushing their right to get out and move out into the communities, go back to their families, go to the local GAA match, all the things that we take for granted. And that gives staff then that their own journey of discovery, gives them the way of acting into it. And, it's that transformation that you have staff that, are there for a long period of time. And a lot of the time they can be the greatest, they can have the greatest challenges in moving in this way, but when they do move, I suppose from the research and from the Service Reform Fund, that we found that they move fundamentally, and transformation can occur. And again, the person is always at the centre of that. So in terms of how challenging it is, yes, the research has definitely uncovered just how challenging that is. But in terms of how you move that forward, there is a lot of lessons to be learned. So through the research, what we did is we took cases of decongregation, and they were in the middle of it. They were in the middle of the fire. They were, and we took the lessons that were learned from, persons in charge, from community connectors, from, heads of service, heads of social care, everybody that was in this that had a skin in the game. And what we took from those lessons is, what do you do? As I said previously, there is no one way to do this. It's very complex systems change. There's a lot of voices in the room. There's a lot of different, not only kind of problems, but different solutions. So taking using the business case and the Harvard business model, we took a teaching case and we brought people back into the room and we said, this is what's been learned. And it wasn't about the lessons learned or a model. It was like, if you're at this fork in the road, if you take right, there's pluses and minuses to that route. If you take left, there's pluses and minuses to that route. But what's the least harmful scenario within this? So it was very much taking a business case, taking people around the country, bringing them in prior to COVID into that kind of workshop facility. But the greatest thing that people, and they were huge sessions, there were 70 to 100 people would be at them across a number of different organisations. I think we had 60 or 70 representations from different organisations at a time. But what they felt, people in the room, was like, it was very real, it was very raw, but they could relate to it. And I suppose that relatability is very important if people are in the midst of that change. So it's taking the research, taking the lessons learned, but making it very applicable, making it very relevant to people. So it's incremental change. So they go back and they're able to do something Monday morning, or they're able to enhance that practice. And then through COVID, we would have moved those sessions onto the webinars. And again, we ran, six of those sessions, all in collaboration with the HSE National Office. So you have that feedback loop continuously going back. So there's no one way to do this, I think, is what we found. But in order for that to sustain and embed, it's incremental changes that get made. It's not very sexy, it's not overly attractive, it's that hard grind a lot of the times on the ground with the people, but it's the transformations in the lives of the people that have been supported that really, like staff have said, I'm happy to go to work, I have hope. You know, I know my practice was less than and very much less than previously, but I had an aha moment and I'm able to move forward with that. And they go on a journey then together. They leave the congregation setting, and a lot of the time we say that's really the start line. I suppose people feel that you've arrived and you're there, but it's really the starting point in terms of community living and the UN Convention in particular. So I hope I've answered some of those questions.
Thank you so much.
Tara.
I just maybe pick up just on one of the other key ingredients was when we set out in the Service Reform Fund, we sat down with the HSE National Disability team. So there's 3 members from that team that worked with us hand in glove, as Niamh said. And every meeting we went together, we turned up together. So all of our kind of tricks of the trade, they were picking up at the same time. So when we set out like a criteria for funding, we worked very much in tandem with the HSE around this is the criteria, how would this land with the CHOs and the senior manager within each of the services, and what was realistically what was happening. They obviously knew what funding HSEs and service providers were getting, so they were able to say when applications come in, well, you know, they're already getting funded for that, we don't need to double fund. You know, the funding was a huge important aspect of this as well, because I remember going out to one of the services one time and they said, so we just can't buy a bus for this. And we went, no, this is tied to actual people moving to the community. So we need to be able to track people. We need to see how this is going. And then the training, the HSE was involved with that with us all along. So they came with us on the journey. So they have the skills now to continue with this work. As I said in the opening statement, the SSDL training is continuing on through the National HSE Office and the community practice. So that's an excellent resource to have. And just in terms then of people who didn't, and families who don't want to move, I suppose one of our key was that we always ingrained in all the staff, and that everybody had the opportunity and everybody had that chance to work with a staff member in an individualised way, to work with a person to say, yes, this is what I want to explore it. In the early days we'd have worked with the people who really wanted this, and families were saying we want a different type of a service. And then as more and more people started to move, other families who weren't maybe as keen, or individuals weren't as keen, were like, oh, well, you know, they have their own house, and you know, I went down to visit, now when am I getting my house, and when can I go out into the community, and when can I do X, Y and Z. So I suppose like kind of that kind of had a ripple effect. But there was some people that they said, this isn't for me, this is not what I want, and other arrangements would have been made in terms of maybe moving into other group homes and things like that. If it was like a HICWA closure order and that building had to close, there was other arrangements. But one of the things that we would have said at the outset was that everybody has to have the opportunity to do that one-on-one discovery, that piece with them. So I think that was a key as well, so that nobody got left behind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're happy to thank you, Deputy Cairns, for your questions and comments in relation to us having knowledge of us in Cork. It's always good to hear. For us, in terms of your question, I suppose just in terms of simplifying the service, I'd really like to have Aileen talk about that, because one of the challenges that we observe is where it is really difficult. There is such, for families, and Aileen will speak about this from experience, that search for services and supports, and that ongoing, the energy that needs to be put into that, and the challenges that's there. So I agree with you on simplifying the services, and Aileen, maybe you could talk about what it's like on a day-to-day basis really for trying to get access to the service. And then Colette will talk about like what our model does, because we wrap around service, and we also have that coordinated care plan and develop a care plan for children, adults and families where they can be signposted to other services. And just before that, I suppose just in terms of the 2 key founding principles for us at Crann, and they respond to your point in relation to collaboration and not duplicating services. So we do not duplicate services at Crann. If a service already exists, we do not duplicate that, because there's no added value. Nothing happens, nothing changes for the family then. It just adds to that confusion of, do I go to A or B? So one of our founding principles, going back to Kate's commentary on the founding of the organisation, was that we are not going to duplicate services. So that has helped us well, and has helped to add value and to add important services into the mix. And in relation to collaboration, it is a key principle for us. We began offering services in earnest in 2019, And when you're starting from the beginning, when you have a team of 2 people, you kind of recognise that you're not going to be able to do this all on your own. So collaboration for us was hugely important, and we're really fortunate to collaborate with, and we have our collaboration partners through the